Welcome to the Deerfield Theater podcast. In this season, we're talking about Theater D's production of Our Town. In case you're tuning in and didn't already know, Deerfield Theater is putting on a production of Our Town this March and April of 2025. And performances start Friday, March 28th and go through Sunday, April 13th. So while you're listening to this episode, visit the link in the show notes and get your tickets. Without further delay, here's the episode. I'm thrilled to have with me in what has become a special thing for the Deerfield Theater podcast, somebody who's not just performing in one of our upcoming shows, but is also an actual experienced performer out in the real world too. So we're thrilled to have with us today, Ryan Bond. Welcome to the Deerfield Theater podcast.
Hello, Deerfield Theater podcast listeners. Thrilled to be here.
So I gave a little tease, Ryan, but go ahead, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Oh boy, that's always kind of a big story, right? But I'll kind of start it up at the top pretty easily. So I am in my later 40s. I am a parent, so happily married, a parent of a sophomore in high school and an 8th grader, and I'm in the Evanston-Skokie area. And to go all the way back, my wife and I actually met in high school as friends doing theater. So I was doing stage production, back end stuff, and they had kind of met and joined. So theater's been in my blood for a real long time, mostly on the production side. And eventually later on, we'll probably touch on the podcast, but got involved a handful of years ago, flipping from the production side, executive producing, advising board side, and made the switch to kind of moving on to stage. And that's really where a good percentage of my time is spent right now. And I've been involved in digital marketing and software and game development. And I'm just thrilled to be kind of expanding my footprint around the Chicagoland area. And with my first production here with Deerfield, this is a great play to be able to be a part of.
And I want to let folks know if they've been listening to this podcast only, if you go to deerfieldtheater.substack.com and on our YouTube channel, you're going to actually start seeing the videos. So you can see Ryan has a nice mic set up and we're in the good headphones. And so this is, you're good on the production side of things, even with the voiceover space.
Yeah,
right?
I've got a little bit of space inside the digital area. When I think about going back to when I was a kid, one of the things I wanted to do was really just create, right? So whether that was writing stories, working on early 8-bit pixel video games that I would start to program and such, and eventually went to college and got a BFA in digital arts. So whether it was multimedia or film or video or stage or graphic design, I kind of do a lot of those things. And to date myself, back then the term would have been things like webmaster or multimedia expert. And so I touched on a lot of those components. So have continued to stay involved in all the different aspects of creating content in one way or another.
Yeah. While I'm only in my late 30s, by comparison, as a former philosophy major, content creator wasn't actually a job you could have back in the day. So I pursued law instead. But inevitably, with the podcasting stuff that I do, still also love the content creation space. It wasn't a pursuable career path back then.
Although now, in the space of business and philosophy, there's a lot of great kind of business people that have kind of moved into that space, motivational speakers. So, you were just a little before your time. They took it and ran.
Right. Now that's a pursuable career path though, is being a content creator.
I listened to Ryan Holiday, who does the Memento Mori kind of podcast, and it's great to kind of just think about some of that stuff. And he brings out Marcus Aurelius and how to approach life, and some of those same poignant thoughts that are in that same podcast really resonate with the Our Town themes that we've got going on, right? Like, how have you lived life? How had you made the most of it? This is your one big explosive chance, as far as we know about, to make an impact and appreciate everything that's there. So there you go. Philosophy does come back oftentimes.
It does. And speaking about Our Town, thank you for the segue, Ryan. It's almost like you've been on a podcast before. Tell our audience a little bit about Our Town and about your role in Theater D's production of Our Town.
Sure. So Our Town was written by Thornton Wilder, one of the greatest American plays, as many people have gone ahead to say. And many people may think about it as that quiet, no set, boring play about a bunch of things that don't really matter, that happen in a small town that may or may not really exist, of Grover's Corners. And it really is a wonderful 3-act play that is emceed by stage manager, a character who exists both in and out of the context of the play. And he takes us through the daily life of two families, a handful of citizens in Grover's Corners. And you get to kind of watch and experience what it's like and to take a moment and experience the pause of life, of the casual and the closeness, and really focus in on what that might be and how your own life may resonate or ripple or take effect from that same experience. So I play the role of Simon Stimson, who is the town choir director. And as the play starts to unfold a little bit into Act One, you learn that he may or may not be one of the town drunks that are plaguing the town. There are 1 to 2 town drunks, and it's a relatively alcohol-free town. And Simon has a unique history, a unique past, and he has talked about through many of the acts of the show of both about his impacts on people or his indirect of how it impacts the town. And I was honored to be able to play this role of Simon, who resonates. His ripples echo throughout all of the acts of the story.
So you mentioned, I think that's a good teaser for our town, and just want to remind folks, link in the show notes to get your tickets, or go to deerfieldtheater.com. You mentioned you started out in the production space in theater before moving into actually performing. How were you able to make that transition, and in what ways was being on the production side, in what ways did that help inform your acting?
Sure. So I started back with theater in junior high, kind of moving on to the stage crew side of things. So I've been watching and seeing a lot of theater, and you start to learn just by being around it about what audience is like, especially if you're in a show, you're running through tech, you're doing performances, and you see what starts to resonate with audiences, and you see performances from these performers over and over and over again. So you start to, take silent mental notes of kind of what that ends up being. And originally, I wanted to move into being a film producer, cinematographer, director, even a little bit of writer. People like James Cameron and Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were very early inspirations for me of people who kind of did a lot of those things, lots of multi-hat, multi-hyphenate people in the industry. And so that's what I was starting to go to in college, and had put theater to the side and started to move into film. And then it just kind of came back, like I couldn't let it go. So when graduated college and moved back to Chicago, I started to get involved with the scene again, back into the board advisory, marketing advisory, sitting on reading scripts for helping theaters to evaluate what shows could be produced in the following year, kind of understanding the zeitgeist of what the town might be wanting to see more or less of what was going on around there. And as I was starting to do those things, I was really enjoying that work. And then COVID hit and things kind of shifted. So I had been doing work with storefront theater, and most storefront theaters really had to close their doors at that point. And while I had been involved on the other side of things, I can be a very outgoing, boisterous person. I'm a leader in the industry. I'm a scoutmaster, so I'm in front of children. So this is all fine. My firstborn child got into theater on his own, and my wife has continued to be a singer. So it's still kind of in the family, in the life. And he had been performing, not by pushing by us. And I decided that there was an opportunity to flip. My wife and son had been in a couple shows together, family performances outside. And I said, well, let me give this a shot. And I gave a shot to a play called The Radio Disaster Play. And I had never really worked on being off book. Of course, I'd never been on stage. And the conceit of this show was a radio disaster, a radio play that you're kind of watching from the audience that goes wrong. And the thing is that we had our scripts in front of us because that was the conceit. And so you're turning the pages, but while you're reading your lines, there's also character drama happening above the script. And so it was the greatest opening for me, where I had my lines in front of me. So if I ever dropped a line, I could literally look down, see my line, and go, there it is. And it wouldn't be obvious. It wouldn't be breaking character. And it worked really well. That character I also played in that show was also forced to play 6 different versions of himself. So he has to be harried as well. So it was perfect. And so that really started that introduction to moving from behind the scenes to on there, and had at that point had seen so many plays, had worked on many, that some of it was natural, some of it was learning. And that's kind of what I've continued on for the last few years.
Well, you brought up the pandemic and what impact that had on what you were doing at the time in the theater communities, and we do actually like to get the perspective of our guests on this podcast of what that experience was like, and then compared to as the pandemic started to ease and we got back to doing live theater. So tell us about your experience
Sure.
there.
So that show I did, Radio Disaster, we had done, and the audience that we let into it was reservation only, and it could only be clustered in terms of seated in chairs. So it might be one person sitting 15 feet from someone else. It might be a family of four sitting 15 feet. So the audiences were very small. And that was,
Mhm.
for me, a great way to kind of get introduced to an audience, but not get too nervous about it. And the productions that started to get chosen after that, we started to move and do some stuff outside and experience how could you be in masks and start to perform and learn some of that. And one of the transition performances I was working on was in the Crucible, and I played Reverend Paris in that one, and he and the whole cast were all wearing masks, and we did one weekend of performances, I believe, and then right there on Wednesday on one of our pickups, we decided the ban was lifted. We could perform without masks. And we ran that pickup rehearsal maskless. And it was exhausting. We had spent months with masks and not learning to act with your whole face. It was eyebrows and eyes, and your mouth could kind of do its own thing. And suddenly, these people who we had never seen without masks, they looked different. Their faces were different. Our responses were different, and that was so transformative and draining and exhausting and wonderful, and all of this way to kind of just, now there's so much more to work with versus just some eyebrows and some eyes. And so from there, theater quickly started to kind of expand from being these closed limited audiences to everything else. But that one night at the Crucible pickup that we had was powerful to understand what theater, what physical proximity does for that audience. And that show was done in the round, and a powerful, meaningful show to just now be closer to our audience, to be in that particular space, to be breathing on someone. There are a lot of close, intimate moments of the Crucible where characters are getting really close, and you're like, well, what happens if I spit on you, right? And that was there, those were concerns. And we're like, well, let's just go for it. And we did it as a cast. We held hands and said, we're gonna do this because it was really important. That was a show that says a lot of things, that means a lot of things. And as artists, that's why we're here. We're here to make impact and resonate with the communities that are out there.
Wow. I mean, really great story, ups and downs, but I think that highlights for longtime listeners and in particular those younger who maybe have a different perspective on the pandemic or grew up with it to like actually get a sense of what it meant for us to not be in our masks after years of having to do that. So then what brought you then eventually to Deerfield Theater and wanting to be in our town?
Sure. So I've seen a lot of the performances that have been kind of advertised that's up there, and really excited about moving my way up towards there. So right now I'm in the Evanston Skokie area. A lot of the performances that I've done have been kind of in this proximity, and Deerfield has put on some great productions from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Noises Off. And we've seen a lot of the children's performances that have been there, like Me and Jane and Fancy Nancy. We just have had friends that have been in there, and the theater community there is so warm and welcoming and inviting and accepting. The theater space is fantastic to get inside Caruso and be with these wonderful seats, this great stage. We were just able to do some rehearsals in the past week, and that difference between, a small community house to a larger stage is just it hits right in the heart when you're in that space, and you can feel like we're making art, we're making theater. Now that can be the same thing. I do outside theater during the summer, and there's no lights. We do have the benefit of some microphones, but like, we're creating. And so I've always appreciated what doing theater wherever it can be. And Deerfield has been launching some great shows. And so our town hit and resonated with me. And I was thrilled to be able to kind of be an opportunity to have working with this cast.
Yeah, yeah, and it's great to hear that from somebody who discovered it from outside because I grew up in the Buffalo Grove area, and while my father was in theater, we only did community theater a couple of times growing up, And I was usually, if we were going to see theater, it would be at the Marriott or it would be downtown or it would be somewhere like that. So being roped in by one of our board members into Deerfield Theater when I moved to town, like I've been spoiled. It really is like next level for what I've come to understand as community theater, what Deerfield is able to put on, and that I have any contribution into that as being a board member is a nice fun thing. And then getting to actually like go with my wife or go with our friends like to go see some of these shows. Like we're going opening night for our town because our mayor will be there. That also opening nights are fun. And so it's just, yeah, I mean, we are very fortunate to have such a great theater program, and that we are able to partner with the Park District and the
Yeah.
local middle school, to be able to put on these productions. It really is like the town coming together in this instance to put on our
Right.
town.
Yeah. And I think about, I grew up in the area, but my older son does theater as well. He just, went through some auditions at school and thankfully, as of yesterday, got cast into the show that he was in. But the wonderful thing is that if he didn't like the role or didn't get cast, there are other opportunities all over town. So it's like, okay, so you didn't get into your high school production. Great. Let's go over to Skokie, Devonshire and audition over there. Oh, there's another thing that's coming up for this other theater performance at Mudlark Theater. Let's go give that a shot. And it felt that
Mhm.
it was much sparser when I was a kid, that there wasn't as many opportunities. If you didn't get into a show, that was kind of it. There were always opportunities if you had a lot of money to get into something more fancy, but that ability to have theater existing at so many different levels is fantastic. And when I meet people who don't know that, I do the best to kind of inform them like, if you don't get into this one show, there are many of other opportunities. So, my son and his friends are freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, and we're like, well, you didn't get into the high school program, but like there's one at this community place and one at this community place. As long as you can get a car or if you need help driving there, it's all around. So Deerfield, Lake Forest, Winnetka, Wilmette, Evanston, Skokie, it's just everywhere. And when I talk to friends in other towns and other states, they're just like, no, we have nothing, or we have one theater, or it's only the big theater that's in town that brings through the traveling company. And that's what I love about Chicago land, the kind of 30 miles around Chicago. It's just happening everywhere. And if you've got time and some resources, you can just go find a play that you want to be in because they're all different, whether it's a musical or a farce or a drama or a comedy, Shakespeare, improv, like there's nothing that you can't hit with a stone within a reasonable, zip code movement.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's really encouraging for some of the younger listeners to hear parents of kids who are interested in theater, because we get some interest from the high school, college age bracket for some of our performances, but we'd love to have more. And I know that there's not enough opportunities out there for everybody. So if you're listening to this or you know somebody who might, be interested, please share this episode with folks to know, hearing from Ryan that it's really, there's a lot of great opportunities out there. And speaking of cool opportunities, Ryan, you are occasionally on TV, from what I understand. And so you wanna tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Sure. So starting in 2025, I always do good New Year goal planning. And so what are some of the things I want, right? What's the play I want to try or a class I want to try out? And I wanted to get my hand a little bit more into television work now that I have a little bit of flexibility with my schedule. And so I've been doing work on Chicago Fire, Chicago PD, Chicago Med. So that's kind of part of the One Chicago family of shows. I've done some work on Dark Matter, which is a show that is on Apple TV, and then starting to experiment with a couple of Netflix shows that are out there. And so some of this has been stand-in work where you are a lookalike towards someone that is a celebrity. It costs a lot of money to have them on set. And if you meet the visual criteria, you stand in for that. Most of the time, you're not running any lines, but they just want to know that you are comfortable being looked at, being stared at. There's a camera on you. You're kind of standing there. And effectively, it's like in theater terms, it's a cue to cue. So you're kind of, okay, we're going to move you over here. The camera's going to practice this way. Are you comfortable having 100 people staring at you? Not all background actors. Most background actors don't really want to be the center of attention with everyone looking at them. They're like, I'm a background actor. So I like in doing stand-in work, and then I've done background work on a couple of these episodes. So that is pantomiming, which is perfect for our town. So you're supposed to in our town, it's a propless show in general. So if you're making breakfast or you're milking the cow or bringing the stuff around, you're invisibly holding stuff. And so that work is actually, interestingly enough, as I've done background work, you are moving your mouth, you're making physical gestures, but you're not actually talking when you're on set because they don't want your background noise. They're focused strictly on those actors. So knowing how to do a lot of facial expressions, do a lot of body movement, do a lot of, pantomiming of what you're actually saying to keep engaging when they run those things has been a great opportunity. So it's fun to kind of do that stuff. And Chicago has just enough production effort going on between these shows that it's a fun place to play in.
Yeah, pantomiming has always really interested me too because it's almost like if you have a scene partner or partners, you're improving, but you have to imagine in your own mind what they actually said to respond to it. So it's almost like improving with yourself as you're improving with other
And
people.
sometimes you get a little bit of work, right, between those shots. You might work out a little bit of like, hey, this first part maybe I'll talk about this and then you'll respond this way and then we'll do that and do whatever and you'll find up your story, right? I had one where I was way off in the background and me and the background actor, we kind of just said, well, we're two people talking about these things. Let's pull out our phone occasionally and point at the phone as if I'm showing you family pictures or a restaurant in the neighborhood just to add some differentness and dynamicness to the scene. And those are all fun character building moments to do. And when you think about a play, there are a lot of times if you're on the ensemble, you need to find something to do in the background, right? If you're doing a Cinderella show and there's an ensemble, a cast of people that are in the background, right? Beauty and the Beast, they're all the citizens of town. And you need to buy some bread, you need to buy a necklace, you need to know how to kind of be comfortable without having stage direction other than townspeople do things and how do you invent that is a fun kind of overlap there.
Well, going off that, and now that and we'll let you include when you've produced shows in the past, we like to know from our guests here, what have been some of the favorite shows that they've been in and some of the favorite shows just as an audience member that they like to go and watch?
Sure. One of the favorite shows that I've done in the last couple of years was Drowsy Chaperone, which is a musical. And I played Man in Chair. And Man in Chair, very similar to Stage Manager, exists from our town, exists both inside and outside of the play. So they comment on a lot of what's going on. And playing that part was really interesting is that you're not really part of the cast. And I had to do my own character work and really understand what is my character's story. And as an audience member, you're learning more about who they are over time until he has a big breakdown in the second act and going, why is that breakdown happening? What's his backstory? So that was fantastic to be a part of that show. I did a play called Ghosts and Zombies, originally Ghosts, based off of the Ibsen play, but it was modernized to add zombies to that element. And I got to do that with my older son and my younger son. And it involves stage combat and blood and a prop gun that shoots off. And that was a fantastic atmospheric experience. And then the last play that I really loved being in was Little Women. And that happened to be with my wife, and both of my sons were in that. And that show, Little Women, is just such an impactful story. And it was great to do family theater with all four of us together from some of those. On the other side, we see so many shows downtown and around town. Generally, while I may have favorites, what I really love is watching a community show. And I love watching a mix of people of different ages, of different experiences, of different calibers coming in and intermingling and mixing to create something that is very different than a downtown show. A downtown Chicago show is, whether it's traveling or high caliber, these are, you're talking $200 seats versus maybe a $10 seat, maybe a buy one, get one free, right? These are in a community. These are people who are striving and trying something, or they're people who maybe did it for a long time, took a long hiatus and are now back doing it again. And you'll have a mix of people that like just love it or just love the show. And that to me is, I empathically connect with what that audience is looking to do. And that to me is just the best experience to kind of watch everyone pushing their limits and doing some of that stuff. And when I think about who we are as people, a lot of people just spend a weekend kind of just getting into a routine and not trying something new and not pushing outside their comfort zone and watching someone occasionally struggle with a line or not hit a note or, maybe not getting a blocking right and not breaking down and pushing through that moment. Those are the beautiful moments as much as I love a really deep, impactful, emotional story that really hits me, right? A Dear Evan Hansen, or the heights of a Wicked, or the beauty of an Into the Woods. Those are such high caliber, it's hard to even compare. And so I find the beauty in that, the community theater, a lot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, that's great. And it's always great to hear what people recommend in case somebody hasn't seen a show before. So then now's your last chance, Ryan, at least last chance on the podcast, and that is to get butts and seats for our town. So like, what's your final sales pitch? If folks aren't convinced that that they should come see you and the other incredible performers in our town for Theater D, why should they come see the show?
So right now, our town, I find, is incredibly relevant with the fast-paced life that we've got. The screens that are in our way, the work that's demanding on us, the bosses and family members that are distracting us. And to spend time in a 3-act play, which is also not typical for a lot of the shows that are right now. You have a nice 3-act here. And each of these acts is wonderfully bookended. You can kind of understand where the play is going. And to take the time to really think about your own life, this show will help you tap into that, into your life, into the life around you. And there will be smiles, there will be laughs, there will be tears. And our town is something that many kids, as I talk to my high schoolers and such, they don't know the show. And so bringing kids to this show, a variety of ages, will be unique for them, because this play has kind of fallen out of high school favor in exchange for other shows. So they may hear about it on a test. My older son knew about the show, was like, "Oh, I've heard about that show. I took a test. I answered a question about it, but I don't know that show." They know the Hamiltons and they know some of these bigger ones. And this is a place to get them into a play in wonderful theater, comfortable seats for a reasonable price, to see a mixed aged cast present something that should impact everyone's hearts and heads.
That's a phenomenal pitch. Thanks for that, Ryan.
Sure.
I think it's great. If people weren't already convinced, they're doing it now. And I could always edit this part out if you don't have anything. But do you have like a performer's website, social media handle, anything that you want to promote that like folks should follow you on, anything like that?
I have an Instagram handle that mostly is showing off my running expades, my gaming, and my theater performances, whether I'm seeing them or doing them. So that's just at Nightpearl, NIGHTPEARL, on that side. And my performer website is woefully out of date, so I'm working on that slowly.
All right, all right. So not linked to that in the show notes, but follow Ryan on Instagram. One last time, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Matthew.
And that's our show. Please share this podcast to help support the work of Deerfield Theater. An even better way to support us is to go see our town. To purchase tickets, visit deerfieldtheater.com or click the link in the show notes. Thank you to the production staff and cast for our town. Please follow us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your preferred listening app to never miss an episode. Until next time, thanks to everyone who continues to support the arts. We'll see you at the theater.